Okay, thank you for joining us today on our session to explore some strategies for increasing engagement in a distance learning environment. Next slide. You will notice in the chat box, we have a Google form. It has a couple questions. Don't start filling this out, but please pull it up so that we're trying to explore different ways to increase engagement even during this webinar. So when we reference this, which we'll do shortly, I just want you to be able to have that ready to roll. It is in the chat and you can get that link there. Also, it is in the calendar invite. As you can see from this screenshot, I added it. You'll also notice that you can access the handout as well as the reflection form via the calendar invite as well. That being said, the handout has a lot of great information that you're probably just going to want to look at after our session, and we encourage you just to engage in this live session currently at this time. Jenny, next slide. The goals for today, one are I can differentiate between engagement and just paying attention and completing tasks. There is a difference. The second point is that we want you to be able to evaluate different types of visible thinking strategies. And then the third one is that you can identify technologies that can be used to engage students in these visible thinking routines. So as we go through our work today, we want to be very specific about the instructional side. And then we're going to give a lot of examples of tools that can help maximize student engagement while employing these strategies. The next slide, Jay. The reflection form at the end. This is something that you'll find in the calendar invite, and we will also send with a recording of this webinar. Obviously, if you're joining today, you're probably not going to watch the recording, but you're always welcome to go back and revisit it. And for our colleagues who are not able to join us today live, they will be accessing the webinar recording as well as be eligible for the professional learning hours in my learning plan once the reflection form is created or completed. Okay, next slide. Next week, we'll be offering a session on Google Forms. It will be quite going into not only the basic uses of Google Forms, but all the way to the more complex features that have to do with maximizing student accountability, locked mode, all those features that we keep getting questions on about how to really maximize the security part of using Google Forms. Next slide. So we're going to kick off with an audience participation question. This is the first question in the Google form, and we want people to think about which student expression here or quote represents engagement. So think about it and select your response. So something that's actually pretty interesting. We have a wide variety of people responses when we come to thinking about engagement. And I was doing some research and reading a lot of stuff on Marzano by Marzano as I was putting together this presentation for today. And there actually is there is a correct answer for these examples in this question. So what does engagement look and sound like? Next slide. These are the answers. There's actually a difference to just how kids are paying attention and being compliant versus true engagement. And when we talk about that, engagement really answers the questions. Can you go through the builds, Jenny? Of this is important and is this important and can I do this? That is really at the core of engagement. So when we think about the why of learning, making sure that they can know why this information is important. And then also, for example, I put some examples here, like I have the strategies that I can fall back on and rely on when I say don't know a word in a text that I'm reading, all the way to paying attention has to do with how do I feel and am I interested? It's not that paying attention is a bad thing or compliance is a bad thing because, things have to get done. But in an ideal world, we want to think more about empowering students to know the value of their learning and why it's important, and then how they, what they can do when they're stuck. So when you look at some of the answers, they're really the last two on the Google form were the ones that really hit that engagement part. And the first two were actually had to do with capturing attention. The next question, next slide, had to do with audience participation, thinking about where are you most interested in thinking about your online learning environment. Next slide. And we found that most people are very curious about improving their use of feedback, followed with an equal second of building a positive teacher relationship as well as peer-student relationships while working online, all the way to thinking about effective pacing, and then how do we come across with intensity and enthusiasm. So nice. Jenny, next slide. Engagement doesn't happen on its own. And today we are going to talk about very specific ways for to design your goals around teaching, the instructional side of pieces, and how you design online learning environments to have high impact engagement be the outcome. Next slide. We will talk about strategies that can lend itself to providing effective pacing and how to keep track of how do we keep kids on track. When learning goes too fast or we present information too fast, that's not good. If we're too slow, they lose interest. We're also going to talk about ways to demonstrate intensity and enthusiasm. We know in an online environment, it's different than when we see kids face to face, when we can be jazzed about a topic and it becomes infectious. We're going to talk about different tools and strategies for carrying those pieces over online that may become a little more easily when we are working in a face-to-face setting. So next slide, Jenny. And then we're going to talk about what people are most curious about, looking at that consistent feedback and building positive teacher to student and peer relationships. Next slide. When we talk about student learning and engagement, we're going to talk about using strategies that really help develop authenticity. So how do we really help kids develop those skills where they can apply knowledge and they get to that higher order thinking and deal with complexity? And then how do we use self-reflection and assessment strategies in order not only to help kids become expert learners, but these are also ways to improve engagement in any learning environment, and specifically online. So, Jay, next slide. When we talk about high and low impact learning, and we mentioned this in our last work on when we did the last webinar, when we did the work on assessment for learning, and this comes from Grant Wiggins talking about how there's a difference between the type of learning experiences we can give kids, ones that lend themselves to high impact learning and engagement, and then ones that maybe aren't as motivating for students. So that being said, as we hit the builds here, some high examples have to do with how do we engage kids in thinking about the real world? How do we provide time for students to practice, internalize, transfer, and gain independence? And actually, there's a lot of great ways to set learning up in an online environment in order to do that. We're going to provide options for choice and personalization, develop and connect to skills for the future, helping kids make those self-to-text, self-to-self, text-to-self world connections are so important. And we're going to talk about different ways to do that in online environments, if they're working with a text-to-video or another mode. We're also going to then talk about how to help connect past learning and future learning in the student experience. So next slide, Jane, having to do with part 2, we're going to talk about the how. So those are our goals of how to create an engaging environment. And if you go to the next slide, Jane, you'll see that we ask people to rate their current understanding and familiarity with visible thinking strategies. And this is where our current audience members feel that their experience with visible thinking strategies is. And I think that's great. I think we have people across the board, but I also think the majority of people being in column 1 and column 2. I think you're going to find the resources today exceptionally valuable. Okay, next slide. Specifically, we're going to talk about visible thinking strategies to help accomplish these things. And next slide for some examples. One of my absolute favorite websites, which just got a facelift in the recent past, is done by Project Zero. It's through the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and they have a lot of wonderful resources that we are going to be drawing from today. Jay, can you go to the next slide? When it comes to looking at the categories of strategies for visible thinking provided, you may realize as we go through some of these stages that you may already be doing them face-to-face with kids on paper or asking for them to do things verbally. Jenny, did you show both builds?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay, so next slide. When you're on that website, which is linked in our handout for today, you will notice that there are also ways to sort through not only by subject, but by type of thinking. I like to encourage people to use that right-hand side to sort through some of these materials if you're trying to navigate them all the way to, if you look further down on our next slide, which Jay will direct us to, is that you can dig through a variety of different types of strategies. So as we go through the work today, we're going to pick sample strategies and then show how these technologies can be used to carry them out. Okay, next slide. When you select a strategy, it will pull up the following information. For example, I know Jenny and I are big fans of the See, Think, Wonder strategy. So after maybe a student analyzes a picture, watches a video clip, if you changed it to hear, it could be an audio clip or a podcast you may have kids listen to, or even a small lecture that you may give. You could do hear, think, wonder. But what you'll see is on the paper here is that they'll tell you the purpose, the application, and ideas for launching it. We'll be doing how to use the technology to launch these strategies within certain contexts. If you hit the build, Jane, here's another example called Stop, Look, Listen. The nice thing about this one is that I think it shows the variety of types of strategies that this site includes. They're very rich. And Jane, next slide. As we kick off to part 3, tools for implementing these strategies are going to be very diverse and to help kids not only get to higher order thinking, but more importantly, improve those elements for engagement in a distance learning environment. So with that, Jenny is going to kick us off with looking at the tools part. I will look at the hopefully catch some of the Q&A stuff later, and I want everyone to know that as I sign off here and Jenny moves on forward with this, that we are excited to brainstorm individually with you anytime after this webinar and think about how to tailor it to your specific grade level, class, and student needs. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Caroline. So when we take a look at tools to implement these strategies, as Caroline said, the website that we were talking about and is linked in the handout is very informative and has a lot of great links. One of the things that I also wanted to just cover real quick is we're talking about increasing that student engagement is curiosity and how to develop that with your students. A particular book that I've found useful for that is Cultivating Curiosity in the K-12 Classroom. It gives a lot of very appropriate ideas for different grade levels. It's not just, it's focused on secondary or elementary, but it really pushes this idea of what is it that students are wondering about. Because once you make those connections, that's another piece where that engagement will grow with your students, as well as having the ability to have appropriate challenges with your students. There's some great resources, and I will also link these. I don't think they're in the handout yet linked, but there's some great resources to create that curiosity with your students, even if it's just an explore time. And obviously this is something you could do right now while you're doing distance learning, but even next year when you're back with your students in class together, where there's this one website has a lot of stuff around different curiosity and as well as some very good TED Talks and videos on curiosity. A particular favorite of mine is Wonderopolis. I don't know if any of you have ever checked that out, but there's actually right at the top when you get to the website, there's this question, what are you wondering? And you can like add a question to the wondering bank. And you just, I kind of get like immersed in these, like the plague doctors dressed like birds. Like that was actually something that I saw, and it's like, well, that's really interesting given what's going on now in masks. Like kids might then want to learn like, well, in the history, where did that go? So again, this is where you could have that building that inquiry or independent learning. Again, it's them kind of choosing where they go. And as you can see on the kind of on the right where you explore wonders, you literally can search for wonders. Like if you're just wondering about nature or animals or whatever it might be, and then they can see what kind of topics pop up. So that's definitely one that you might want to just mention to your students to create that curiosity. But as we know, just like us as learners ourselves, with having that choice, it really does motivate you to engage with learners and think in new ways and develop different ways to approach a problem. And so a lot of times too, when we're talking about this engagement, it might lean in towards inquiry or project-based learning or some of those things that you might want to do on a small scale right now, trying some of those strategies that we'll talk about. But in addition, it allows for a lot of check-in points to see where students are at with this inquiry that they're doing. And in particular, one of the routines that actually is under the category visual arts or objects routine that's in the Project Zero website is looking 10 times 2. And obviously this could definitely lend itself really for an art class. But anything where you're having students look at something that's visual. And so just like Caroline said when she was talking about her 2 strategies, what I love about this strategy and the one that I'll show you after is how it shows you the purpose. But essentially this, you have the kids look at an image, wander around it, and then list out things that come to mind. So again, this strategy is linked in that handout, but there's many more. I was just trying to pick some I thought went really well with some of the apps that we were talking about. I also really like the explanation game, which essentially is a routine that really focuses on the way it is, and it can get students really thinking about why is it that way or what happened and things like that. And so those would be 2 that I would, I really enjoy though how with Project Zero, how they show you how you would actually launch it with your students. That brings me to one of my favorite resources, and I'm sure I've mentioned this to some of you, is the New York Times has a What's Going On in This Picture as a weekly resource that I think works K-12. Obviously, if you're working with younger students, the picture you might want to make sure is appropriate, but usually they're pretty, you know, straightforward. You just want to make sure that it's not like above their maturity level. But this is a great way to generate wonderings as well. And the nice thing about it is they have them all archived for the years that the New York Times has done this. So even if the given article or picture for the week doesn't, you know, match what you want to use, you can go back in time, share those images, do a wonder wall, or try some of these visible thinking strategies as well. So for example, the typical questions that New York Times asks for this activity is, what is going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more can you find out? And so obviously this is just an example of the picture that was on October of 2019. You know, people are looking clearly at a TV. That generates a lot of conversation. I did that with a class because they're like, well, why are they all looking at a TV through a window? Like they didn't, you know, the store looked different than what they would see today, things like that. And so it really focuses on students examining something and coming up with ideas. And then again, that can be a jumping off point for research or wonderings that they might have. In addition, this is actually from Sarah Rose Borelli. Her and I did like a lot of work on inquiry and curiosity and building that about 2 years ago with her students. And this is one of the slides she actually puts up with her kids. And she just wants the kids to say what makes you curious about these different images. And they're from different time periods. And just to get them that wondering, those questioning, and, you know, having those conversations and leads to additional research with their students. So when we're thinking what tools might support like some of these strategies, we just wanted to give you just kind of an overview. And then obviously, as Caroline said, we'll open it up later on to questions and answers. So if you have some questions as we go through these, like you're wondering how this might look in a certain grade level or ideas, just kind of jot those down or put them in the back of your mind so that when we have that time, we take a look at that. As Caroline mentioned, these wondering activities, like what I see, think, and wonder would be great. Padlet is the first one that I want to cover, which I think a lot of you have used as well. And as we already said, if you would like a deeper dive into how to set up Padlet, different ways to use Padlet, those would be things that we can do at another time. But at its most simple, you essentially have the ability on a wall to collaborate with others and share ideas. And you can make it as guided as possible. When you're looking at the picture on the screen, the shelf option, which is the blue option, if you're looking at the different options, that one is really nice to guide our learners. So if you want to have a very guided, like where you want things to be put, you can actually label each of the shelves, and it helps students know where to fill in. If you want to have a more free-flowing wall, that would be the top left option. But you even have a canvas where you can make more of a mind map and things like that. Students can record audio from a microphone. I don't know how the audio works with iPads. We haven't used that with students yet, but you could definitely have them try that out. Also, one thing to remember with Padlet is it is an iPad app that's in our self-service. So if you have our younger students, if they have iPads, but it also can be used through Safari or Google Chrome, and they just go to the website as well. So if that works better for like recording a voice, for example. Of course, all of our 7 through 12 students with Chromebooks would have easy access to this on the web. And again, there are templates, and again, we can dig deeper into this, but the nice thing is there's templates pre-made. Right now, if you've never used Padlet before, there is a 3 live Padlets limit. And all that means is when you're done using a Padlet, if you archived it and saved it, then you'd have a new one open again. So if you were using Padlet before about last year, you probably have an unlimited, like you have a lot more access. It's just Padlet changed their free option. Some Padlets I just wanted to highlight, and I saw Diana Hersig is in our chat today. This is from her class. She did a New Deal project with her students where they had to talk about the 3 R's. And the students chose, they were in partners, and they basically had to talk about relief, recovery, reform. And then below that, so they're using the column method, they just had to add a variety of pieces of information, collaborate together, and then shared it with Diana, who then was able to see where each of the students were at with their learning. When we're looking at a younger grade level, so this is 2nd grade, this is a nonfiction text feature hunt. One of the things to think about is obviously since we're distance learning right now, a nice thing about having something like Padlet live in the background is students could add to it at any time during the day, and you're able to monitor it. You also, if you go into settings, can make sure that you can even turn on filters like a profanity setting if you're concerned about that and things like that. But again, that would go back to, I think, that digital citizenship piece conversation of being very mindful of what we're posting and what we're representing. This is actually from Kelly Rado's class. She's a 2nd grade teacher at Elmwood, and the students really love seeing that as they were taking pictures and adding to the Padlet, other kids were adding things as well. So it's just kind of like a nice live where you could have a wondering wall, or really anything like that, just to get kids thinking, or having all students even, focus on one specific topic that you've identified, and they're all adding information that they're finding or things that they're creating. Even if it's art class and they've created a picture of a topic, everyone can take their own picture of their piece and put it onto the Padlet. So it's just thinking of ways to create that collaboration in the background where you're not necessarily needing to be with the students the entire time. And so Padlet, again, would be very well suited for a lot of the visible thinking strategies that we already mentioned. Another one that I know in the district has been used quite a bit is Flipgrid. Nice thing about Flipgrid is Padlet is kind of like you have some options. It's more like you're seeing a lot of images and text typically, though kids can record voice. Flipgrid is purely mostly a video chatting where kids can check in and say where they're at, but it's in still that more grid-like format where you can see multiple students and it's a little more interactive. I know that Flipgrid, has been used extensively in the World Languages department, and it's just a nice way for you to record and hear where students are at. And essentially, again, we can dive into this if you're interested, but you can either have your walls active or inactive. And at the top, they call within your Flipgrid, you have grids. And so you can see this is an example of an English classroom where they have multiple grids. And so like English 9 DROY, that's one class. And then if you look over where it says activity, there's 3 topics within that activity. So think of topics as like assignments. And again, students can record. Some students, as you can see in this past slide, we usually discourage them from being silly and having like the sunglasses and things on it. But you, again, can try that out with your kids. But students sometimes also might choose not to be visibly seen. Lori Karolek, who is also, I believe, at this meeting, unless she had to leave. We actually did the New York Times What's Going On in This Picture about 2 years ago with her kids using Flipgrid. And so you can see that this is the post on the left where it says what's going on in this picture. There's the picture. They could make the picture bigger. And each of the students had to look at the image. Then you'll notice these pictures on the right. The students actually had to write out ahead of time on paper what they really thought the picture said. So they had to practice. They didn't just go on and free-flowing just record. Now, that's okay too, but they really had to think, how did they want to represent their ideas? And then they recorded. And as you can see, then students can watch each other's recordings to, grow their own ideas. Also, you'll notice some of the students choose to smile and look right into the camera. Some of them are a little silly, and some kids don't even want to be pictured, so you might just see like their name on a piece of paper. So again, it gives them that choice, but again, you're teaching them that digital citizenship piece that, yes, we only assess that necessarily on certain grade levels, but we're always wanting to promote that. So again, those two would be great to support a lot of those visible thinking. We also want to think about how could PowerSchool Learning and some of our Google tools support this engagement as well. Within PowerSchool Learning, I think that the two that really can really build that engagement piece is discussions and polls. And so I just wanted to remind you real quickly about those. As far as discussions go, you might be aware, and if you haven't, you might want to take a look at this. You have different discussion types. So class discussion would be everyone in your class discussing. Section means that if you are a math teacher and you teach 3 sections, you can do it where each section can only talk to each other. Class would mean all 3 sections can talk together. That's just an example. Group discussion is great for when you want to maybe do book clubs or wondering clubs or whatever it might be. So again, if we're thinking about this curiosity, or if we're thinking about this engagement piece, if you assign students to be in a specific topic, and it could be a book club, but it could be something else, they could work in this group discussion to post ideas or resources. And this is great during this time of distance learning, because then the students can post whenever it's convenient to them and their families, and others, what are resources that the other people in their group are finding as maybe they're working to build something or to present something to class. One-to-one discussion is a private journal or blog between the teacher and the student. So think of this as more of like checking in if you wanted students to practice writing on a more, typing out their thoughts and like where they're at, or journaling. And so again, one of the nice features too in discussions is if you check the box that you require students to see before posting, you can prevent students from copying what someone else is saying, and allowing them to actually think about their response first before they can see what others are doing. Polls are also a fun way to see where students are at. Of course, we could use Google Forms, which you guys have already taken a form today, and you could use that as a poll and show them results. But there are also polls in PowerSchool Learning, which, as you can see from this screenshot, you type your question and then you give the choices and you type in the, whatever you want the choice to be. And then you can actually, and this is actually kind of a fun setting, you can choose who votes. So let's say, we do have a lot of parents that are involved within their student work. If you want to check in with them, something to do with distance learning, you could actually choose students to be able to vote, only parents to vote, or everyone on the roster. It's actually an interesting way to actually get parents involved, because typically with assignments or any of those other things, parents can just check in and see if the kids have done the work. They really can't hand anything in or do anything. And this allows them to have a little bit of a participation feel. And so you just essentially publish, and then the parents and or students are able to answer. And you also can decide when the poll closes and things like that. And again, if that's something you're interested in, just contact us and we would be able to go more in depth with that. Google Classroom also has the question feature. So those of you that are using the question feature, what's great about that is it can engage students in that collaborative dialogue, and it's used basically like a discussion post. So similar to PowerSchool Learning discussions, you could use Google Classroom in that same way. And the symbol looks like a question mark, just like I have in the slide. And so here's what it looks like if you were clicking and creating a, instruction. So you would have what it is they're supposed to do. And then as you can see in this assignment, it says respond to a classmate's post. But as you can see, you can moderate when students can reply to each other. On the right-hand side, I checked the box, and now it says students can reply to each other. So you're creating that interactivity, much like you could have in PowerSchool in Google Classroom as well. Other things to think about as well is the importance of scaffolding those collaborative dialogues. So what is your initial thoughts? And then draft a possible comment. I love this structure. This kind of reminds me of what we were talking about with that New York Times Flipgrid example with 4th grade, where it really forces students to think about where they're at. What is it that they're going to talk about and describe? What are their initial thoughts? But now, what is your comment that you're actually going to post in Google Classroom? Again, I think this scaffolding of a collaborative could easily be done in PowerSchool as well, and of course in Seesaw, as a great way for students really to think about and draft out their ideas before they just go and post. Because one of the things that Caroline and I have both been working on is really trying to make sure that students are posting meaningful and organized responses. And I think that as teachers, that's one of the things I hear a lot from teachers as well, is we want to see students posting things that are, professional and school appropriate. And this way students are really thinking through this and understanding the importance of writing in complete sentences and answering the specific prompt. And so again, this is what that would look like. So another example could be, again, the discussion behavior. So you're prompting the students on the left, and then the students are able to fill that out on the right. So what are some questions? What is some things that you're working through? Things like that. Google Meet, which of course we're in today. We often get the question, how many people can be in a Google Meet? You can have up to 250 people. That's one of the big reasons we're encouraging the district to use this as opposed to Google Hangout. And it is within our domain, so that's why we're encouraging Meet over Zoom. Though again, I know some people have been using Zoom as well. It can be recorded, and then that recording processes and it puts it into your Google account. The other interesting thing is the recording will actually go into the calendar invite once it's done processing as well. So it's a nice thing that even students could go back and look at if they needed to refer back to what happened, or if they just want to watch it again for whatever reason. It's secure within our domain. And as you can see today from the screen sharing, what's really great about this is it allows you to see the participants, but also see the content that's being shared. And I did also want to mention, if you haven't already, I've been using the add-on for Google Meet that allows you to do the grid view, and it works really well because then you're able to see everyone that's in the meeting. This is an assignment. This looks very similar to what we discussed last week when we were looking at assessments. But as you can see here, here is the assignment and the engage piece. So again, bringing out that engagement, engage in a Google Meet discussion. So that part that's circled in red, so it tells students right here, join the Google Meet. We'll have a small group discussion during our online meeting. We will want you to share what you've learned and something you still wonder. Again, you're giving them a specific purpose for the meeting and a goal to get them motivated to do the reading and the learning first so that they're prepared to share. And that's a great goal, I think, for all of us too, as we're doing Google Meets with our students. I know that I've been really excited even to watch kindergarten and first grade teams that when they have their meetings, they have a specific task for students so that it's not just we're all going to sit here and just, talk over each other. It's been exciting to watch them have those really serious conversations as well. Not necessarily serious, but on task conversations. Another thing to think about too for when we're having these discussions on something like a Google Hangout or a Google Meet, which is what we've been just talking about, would be the accountable talk stems. These are great to share with your students or, versions of these, or maybe you only want to, provide with them 2 accountable talk stems and say, try to make sure that you use one of these when you are responding to a peer. You also could practice accountable talk with your students using Google Meet in smaller groups. So maybe that's your different groups that you typically would pull during, they call it star time, club time, try to remember all the other times, but those intervention times with smaller groups of students, you could even have some conferencing like that as well. Cammi, which our district has purchased, I know for next school year, is also another tool. It's an add-on for Google Drive. that a lot of you might have used it yourselves for annotating PDFs or other documents, but students as well can annotate, and then they can actually share it via their Google Drive, upload it, or put it into Google Classroom. And so, and again, if you're interested in how could you potentially leverage that, just let us know. Additionally, in Classroom, you can also write notes on your work as well. So for example, you can highlight a sentence or color and write on different parts of your specific work as you're working on it, such as underlining the words and things like that. So again, it's a nice way to mark up the work that you're doing within Classroom. Assignments within Google Classroom as well is a way to provide students with files and links and things that they might need access to, but then of course they have the ability to turn the work in to you. And so that's a nice reminder too with assignments, whereas you can engage students in the creation of whatever that authentic content is. And again, they could be creating this content as well in PowerSchool Learning in an assignment, and we're talking a Google slide presentation or creating a presentation and then doing a screencast and then uploading the video. Those are all different ways where you're engaging them and maybe providing them some choice in how they're actually presenting this content. And of course, you can control the date and due times and things like that to create consistency. One that we mentioned, I think very briefly last time when we had our webinar, was screen recording on the iPad. So all of our elementary students that have access to iPads, and teachers as well, you would want to look at, this is a built-in feature right within the iPad, that essentially when you go into your control center, you basically add the ability to screen record, and it will pop up into your little area when you swipe down on an iPad and get quick access to your control center. You'll notice that there's the button that's circled. This is the recording button. The only thing that I dislike about this feature is it automatically has the microphone muted. And so whenever you choose to do screen recording on the iPad, touch and hold the microphone at first to make sure it's turned on, and then go to record. We've had several students and teachers who have, run into the issue with having it recorded without any sound, which is of course frustrating. When we're thinking about unique ways to have students present on iPads, one of the nice things, and obviously for those of us who are in secondary, a lot of our students do have access to iPhones and iPads at home. And specifically Clips, the app that you can see in the top left corner, Clips is free to all iPhone, iPad, anything users. And it's probably what I would consider the most user-friendly, easy application to make what I can say is a very professional looking video. It does do vertical videos instead of the traditional horizontal. But what you can do is you can add images, video clips, record your voice talking. It has a lot of transitions and music and things like that. And so for even our secondary teachers, if your students have access to this could be on one of those, like if you're assigning something, this could be an alternate choice, like if they want to try it. I did a lot of work this year with Kelly Schlegel, who's an English teacher at Eisenhower, and she did an Eclipse assignment with her students, and we even had a lot of students who have their own either MacBooks or their own, iPhones that they have Clips and iMovie on, and they were like making videos outside of school, then bringing it to the school iPad, and then uploading and adding things. So even in a distance time, if your students don't have access to school iPads, I would still say that iMovie and Clips are great ways for them to have video making capabilities if they do have access to anything like an iPad or a personal device, even a phone, to do those as well. Explain Everything, and I will always say this is my absolute favorite app because it combines video with the presentation tools with audio and mushes it all together in one. And it's so easy to use that we use it from kindergarten up. I know Laura Burgundy's here today. She has used it a ton with her students throughout the years. This is an iPad app, but it is also a web app. It is available in the Chrome Web Store, so our secondary students could access it. A few years ago, we were using it a little bit at secondary, and from what I've heard, it has improved in the recent times, that I would say it's worth encouraging students to try it out. But essentially, if you think of it, it's essentially, and I'll go to this one, it's essentially interactive screencasting tool. So unlike Screencastify, where you're just recording your screen, you could actually move things around and make it a little bit more unique. This is actually Katie Schlegel, who is related to Kelly Schlegel, but she works at West. In this picture, she actually used her own personal iPad and has an Apple Pen and has been making a lot of math videos that she shares with her students. And so that is Katie working on one of her projects that I got a picture of her doing that. But again, teacher created tutorials as well. And again, this could be something you just say to your kids, hey, we have these iPads this year. Why don't you explore, try it out, and see where they go, because a lot of our students are very self-sufficient. A lot of our visible thinking strategies also talk about how can we show or map out where we're going. And I wanted to highlight 2 web apps that we have that are, one is also an iPad app for doing some concept mapping. One is Mindmap 2.0. I do want to caution that you make sure that you do the 2.0, because there's a Mindmap Gold that they keep trying to get you to purchase, and you can access Mindmap 2.0 for free. And essentially what it makes is it integrates with Google Drive. You can share and collaborate mind maps with others or make your own, but you can just map out your ideas right within this web app. And it works really well, obviously, to see where you're at if you're working on a paper or if you just want to show what you're learning. And several of the strategies that are on that website that we talked about, Project Zero, also would really lend themselves well to concept mapping. And I actually put one strategy within the handout that fits directly with using mind maps. MindMeister is an iPad and web app, so it's also in our self-service for the iPad as well. And it's very similar to Mindmap. This one we use the free account, which means you get 3 free maps at one time. So just like Padlet, if you archive a map, then you get a new map. And so you have real-time collaboration. And the only thing that we've had to do to kind of let the free version work really well is I actually encourage students to take screenshots of their mind maps. So you'll see in my picture here, I was making a fake mind map about the atomic bomb. I just took a screenshot of it because the download file is not the best for the free version, but a screenshot works just fine. And students are aware how to do that, either a screenshot on their iPad or a screenshot on the web app. So, and again, if you're interested in the mind mapping tools, I would be happy to review those more with you as well. We mentioned Seesaw last time, but Seesaw as well would really lend itself to any of these visible thinking strategies or engagement opportunities, because again, not only can students take photos and add drawings and videos, but they can label and add extra tools within each of those, and then they can have a voiceover. And it encourages students to have that deeper learning and that reflection. And one thing that we're always trying to hopefully get our students to have is a little bit of that authentic feedback from their peers. And so if you are using Seesaw, similar to what I talked about with PowerSchool with the discussions, with Seesaw, you could think about have that feedback built in during having students respond to each other's posts as well. Also, when we're thinking about how we can increase that engagement is widening that student audience. I don't know if it's feasible during distance learning, but you might want to try to touch base with another, let's say, I'm Tracy Olson and I teach 4th grade at Reagan. What about another 4th grade teacher at Reagan? Could I connect with them? And then kids are sharing work back and forth between each other. All you'd honestly have to do for that is you make a separate Seesaw class, add your kids, the other teacher adds their kids, and now you've got kids collaborating with each other across just classrooms, but it also could be if you know someone across the building. Carrie Bodock, who's also in our meeting today, she's done that quite a bit with Kelly Rado over at Elmwood. 2 2nd grade classes, completely different buildings, but they were sharing poetry. So again, that builds that excitement because you have them working together with peers. Even, I know we have art teachers here today, having students post their artwork and get feedback from others. It just is exciting because then you're showcasing your work and you're getting that real-time feedback from others as well. ShadowPuppet is a nice one as well, especially for probably, I would say, definitely K through 3, as far as students being able to have multiple pictures with voiceovers. This one is in our self-service. And obviously, if your students don't have iPads at home, this is one that's a free app, so parents could put this even on their iPhone or their Android phone. And essentially, what you do with ShadowPuppet EDU is, as you can see in this right picture, the book is like on there, like the kid took a picture of the front page, they just touch the start button and then they record themselves reading the book, for example. So it's kind of like Explain Everything or Seesaw, but they can record each thing and then use the arrow on the right to advance the slide to their next picture that they'll record on. You'll also notice on this left image, one thing I really like about ShadowPuppet is it connects to Seesaw, so that if you are using, again, those K through 3 tend to be using Seesaw, but again, this would even be appropriate for older. Like I could see 4th or 5th grade. I could see other students doing this as well. You can then easily upload it right to Seesaw, so you are sharing. And again, you could use this to get some of those records of how our students, you know, sounding and reading their information. Book Creator, this has been heavily used, especially 3rd grade has really caught on with this. Nick is in our audience today. That's one of your students right there in that picture. Book Creator is a web app and an iPad app. So this is nice because this would be available to K through 12. And so this means that if a student's on a Chromebook or they're on a laptop or on an iPad, they could use Book Creator. For the iPad, it is paid, but we as a district have paid for Book Creator. Online, as you can see in this image, students are able to do just as many things. They can do a variety of things, interactive stories, about me books, comic adventures, poetry, you name it. This could be a great way for them to showcase their new learning from those wonderings, or showcase their new learning from whatever, you know, visible, it's the visible thinking in action after they've done that strategy, and a way for them to show that creativity. You also, as a teacher, could create a library, which within your library, you get one library with 40 books for free. So essentially what that means is if you have a class of like 25 to 30 kids, each student could create one book, but then they'd all be housed in one location. And this is for the web app. If you don't want to use the web app for a teacher library, you also could have kids individually going online and making their own. And if you're interested in Book Creator for the web, I have a tutorial of how to get that started. It's just a video that I can share with you if you're interested in something like that. The iPad app, essentially students create their own personal book, and then they would download it to Drive and share it wherever you want them to share it, whether it's Seesaw, PowerSchool, Google Classroom. So it's very user-friendly. And I love that students have easy access to the safe Google Photos, so that kids kind of either use Google Photos, or we encourage them to use our library resource photos rather than going out onto the web and just getting random pictures. We also quickly want to show you, we have Pictou Chart. And Pictou Chart is an infograph. So again, if you want to have images with information, I would encourage you to look at Pictou Chart. Here's just some student examples from, this is actually Sarah Osprelli's class. So obviously that's higher, this is upper, this is in secondary. So it might be a little more simplistic from elementary. Infogram and Easily are two other apps that we found work really well for students to create essentially, you know, those infographic pieces of information with images and content that they've learned. And lastly, before we open it up to questions, is WeVideo, which is a web app that we pay for. So this would be for our 7th through 12 students on Chromebooks. Essentially, what iMovie can do for iPads, you have that with WeVideo with Chromebooks. So you have personal videos that you can create. I would encourage you to do personal over collaborative and shared, just because we've had those don't seem to work quite as well. Collaborative, it's like each person can collaborate, but they can't be on the video at the same time, so it gets really confusing. But the nice thing about it is, as you can see, you can use a storyboard and you add in your content from Google Drive, just like you would for WeVideo. The other thing that WeVideo has is they actually have pre-made media, like you can see, that you can use, like whether you need animals or different things like that, you can search for and add to the content as well. So with that being said, we just wanted to give you like a peppering, you know, like just a sprinkle of each of these different ideas that exist as far as things that would be engaging both within a distance learning environment, but also when you are back in school next year as well. As Caroline said at the beginning of our session today, we do hope that you can fill out the reflection form. If you fill out the reflection form, I will then add your name on my learning plan to a class that we've created for this session today. Those of you that happen to be here today, if you were at last week's webinar, if you could also please remember to fill out that Google form. I was waiting until next week Monday, and then I'll start adding everyone into that into that My Learning Plan account as well. As Caroline also said, we do have the Google Forms session next week as well, if you're interested in that. And at this point, I want to open it up to questions if anyone has questions, and I'm going to stop presenting my screen. So if you have questions, you can unmute your microphone. I'm sure it would benefit anyone in the group to hear from you. So do we have any questions? Any ahas, things you want to try now that you've seen? Ideas that you have, those also help a lot of times for others to learn from each other. Nobody's got anything?
Sure. I'll say that the book creator is of interest because I think it shows students creating something or perhaps even publishing is more accessible than you'd think. And there are apps out there that kind of allow you to try it out and see what that looks like. And to have it in a digital form would really be rewarding for them.
Definitely. Well, and I think for like art class, I could even see like your students even showing like the progress of their work. I think that could be really interesting because with the online book creator, you can take those pictures and things like that. No, that's a great idea. I love it.
And Jenny, I have used something called Puzzlements by Ian Bird, and it reminds me a lot of the Wonderments. And each week he comes out with a couple of different like types of things that he shares. I can shoot you the link for that. But I've used it in second grade during my Eagle time when kids are not supposed to be learning anything new, but it's been kind of fun for them to take a look. Some of the things are a little bit over second grade head. I think he kind of just does it. I don't know what his education background is. I learned about him at a TAG conference a couple years ago, but it's just been something fun to bring into the classroom to give them a few minutes. And so I even have a poster up on my front wall that says, you know, what do you notice and what do you wonder? And so those are the things that they're supposed to comment on as they're looking at it. So that kind of reminded me of the Wonderopolis. I have been looking at the Wonderopolis while we've been on here, and I think I like that more for the second graders that I have. Along the same idea of getting them, you know, thinking about and engaged in the technology.
Nice. Yeah, if you'd shoot me that'd be awesome.
Sure.
Anyone else? Ideas, things you had connections, things you have to share, maybe things we didn't mention today that you found have worked really well? I saw in the chat that, and Diane, I'll look into why Easily is being blocked. Any other ideas people have for using some of the apps that we mentioned today? Or do you, again, like I said, have a new app or a question for myself or maybe anyone else that's here today?
Hey, Jenny, this might be a silly question, and I'm sure I can find it somewhere, but how do I access last week's webinar?
We will, so were you on the
I did not.
Okay, so we have a Google, and I'll mention this to Caroline, we made a Google site to like house all of them. And so if you weren't on that, I can send you the link to that site. But I'm assuming that we'll also just be sending that out to staff, probably in one of those staff newsletter things that's been coming out. But I'll send it to you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? One thing I wanted to mention, as long as I'm thinking of it, is if you signed up for Screencastify with that code that we put in for the Pro account, just be mindful, because I haven't noticed it on my account, and I have to talk to Brandon, that he said that a district has paid for it through the end of next school year, but mine's still saying it expires at the end of May. So if you just kind of be mindful of, if you go into your account, if you're seeing anything weird about that, let us know to make sure that we can ensure that you're getting the paid account, because I did confirm that we have paid for it through the rest of next school year. So that's just one I thought of because I saw Diane was asking about Screencastify. And as far as, and Diane in the chat box was asking if we have student-friendly screencastify directions for Cammi. We don't have Cammi directions yet, but we can work on that. As far as Screencastify, I have a few of the directions, but if you actually go on their website, what I love about Screencastify is they actually have like tutorials, and then the tutorials are like the kind that actually move, so you can see how it would look for a student if they're going through the process. And so a lot of times I look for those links and send those to teachers. So you might want to look for that there. Diane, is that kind of what you're talking about?
Jenny, what I meant actually is, do we have access, or can we start building a bank maybe of, because I know the Cammi annotations are awesome and they work really well, but because there's so many steps that they have to do by uploading and then by sharing to their drive and then by getting the shareable link to submit, like they really kind of struggle, because what I usually end up getting is blank documents back without any annotations because they've just missed a step in the submission.
Okay.
So it's more like when we're using some of these things and some of these strategies, the kids don't, because it's new to them, we don't have a way to give them those step-by-step directions, I guess, until we start working on some of those pieces, I think is more of what I was mentioning.
No, and that makes sense. And now that we have that purchase, I think that would be something that Caroline and I can work on so that we can send that out. I think that's a great idea.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah. Any other ahas, ideas, questions?
I have one about Seesaw.
Sure.
A while ago, I know we signed up for the 60-day upgrade, which will probably run out before the end of the year. Do you know if there's any way that the district is planning on renewing that at all?
Have you gotten anything? So one thing that's interesting is, because we have the Seesaw for schools, I get what you're saying for K and 1. Have you gotten anything saying that yours was about to expire at all?
No, I think we have until the end of May.
Well, and I think what happens is, honestly, one thing I've noticed that's interesting with Seesaw, when people mention that they're within a school district building, I get this notification saying, so-and-so has said they're a teacher. And then before I can even say yes or no that they can be in the paid account, it like automatically puts them in there. So I think that's on Seesaw then, because then we were getting questions about why there's so many teachers, but it's like, well, then why are you automatically adding them before we're able to say yes or no? So for right now, hopefully, I don't anticipate that being a problem, Carrie, because I feel like they're a little bit overwhelmed of who's paying and who's not. But if you see anything about like your thing is about to expire, let me know so I can contact like Brandon and we can figure out what would go on for the rest of the school year.
Okay, thanks.
And that's a good point too, because I do think now that we've experienced distance learning and you guys know some of the extra features you get from the paid Seesaw, and this is for obviously lower elementary especially, I think it would be correct me if I'm wrong, would you guys say that like K1, 2, 3 would benefit from the paid version of it, especially if this were to ever happen again, Nancy?
Yes, absolutely want to have it again next year. Absolutely.
Okay. Good.
I second that.
Is there anything you guys, because I know Nancy and Paul, you guys have been using it a lot.
Yep.
Is there anything you want to share of things that you've tried that have worked really well with your students, engaging them or anything like that?
Well, I have started making they call them choice boards.
Mm-hmm.
And I just did it for a reading assignment. So I was able to link in different reading level books. So kids didn't have to go out and look for books. Like we kind of assigned a book then.
Okay.
It's taking them to links for other things. Like, there are lots of things like you go on virtual field trips and stuff like that. So I truly hope that we get it back next year.
So now with the choice books, because I had heard about those, but I haven't tried to make one. Is that within the activities portion of Seesaw that they have templates, or where is that?
You actually create it yourself in a Google slide.
Okay.
And then you link it in,
Cool.
and all the links stay live. So it's like a PDF with the live links.
Okay. You know what that reminds me of? It kind of is similar to how people used to use Google Slide for scavenger hunts and like those books that like, if you want to do this, you click here. If you want to do this, you do here.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Nice. Okay.
I like to think of it more as a sequence board, because I just did one for science too, where I had them watch a video of me, then they read something, and then they did like the activity part of it. So you can put arrows in, and I like it more to call it a sequence board rather than a choice board, because For us, it's not a lot of choices.
Yeah.
It's more giving
I
clear
like that.
directions on what to do for our guides.
Is there a place that you found directions for that, or is that something you just kind of made up on your own and created?
No. That was it was a webinar that they had that Seesaw
Okay,
hosted.
that's what I thought. Okay, but they called it choice boards for them, though.
They call it choice boards, yeah.
Okay, nice. No, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, we love it.
I like the way that you say it, 2 sequencing boards rather than
Well,
I like
and
that.
I think it depends on your application.
Right.
You know, for first graders, we need it to be very clear as to what they need to do next. So I offer some choice within the sequence, but not, it just has to be much clearer for them.
Right. No, that makes sense. Nice. Does anybody else have other things they'd love to share? That's thank you for sharing that, Nancy. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, Nan. If you are a Seesaw user, they do have webinars fairly frequently, and they'll email you about them, and they're really well done. So,
yes.
And I do think that there is an archive where you can see old webinars as well.
Yes. Yes.
Anything else? All right, well, I think we are good unless anyone else has anything else to share, which I don't see anyone wanting to share. Please remember to fill out the Google form so that you get credit for attending today. And then if you are interested in doing next week's, please mention that as well when you fill that out. And we'll be sending you information as that comes available. And then, in addition, please fill out the old form if you did not already, if you attended last week's session. All right, well, thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy the cold, January weather that we have today in May. It was snowing in my backyard while we were doing this. So, all right. Well, thank you.